Greetings, welcome to W7U3 Criteria 1. We are continuing outcome based curriculum. This is part 3 of the criterion. In the previous unit, we looked at the subcriteria 1.1.3, 1.1.4 and 1.1.5. In this unit, the outcome is understand the SCR requirements of criterion 1, same outcome based curriculum, subcriterion 1.2. This subcriterion is concerned with curriculum structure and features. The total marks for both Tier 1 and Tier 2 institutes is 30, but again the details of this subcriterion, the required processes, the further delineation of this subcriterion, the allocation of marks for different components of this subcriterion, the required exhibits, they all are different between Tier 1 and Tier 2 institutes. Different means there are some similarities, certain differences, but primarily the subcriterion itself is concerned with curriculum structure and features. But a Tier 1 institute is an academically autonomous institute responsible for its own curriculum, whereas Tier 2 institutes follow the curriculum that has been given by the university primarily, though they do have some freedom in terms of the implementation choices that they make, but the primary responsibility for formulating the curriculum rests with the affiliating university. Because of that, there are certain differences in the way the curriculum structure and features are evaluated between Tier 1 and Tier 2 institutes, but the basic spirit is same. So, the broad aspects to be considered are similar. Once again, we will have to look into the NBA website updates for details of the evaluation guidelines for Tier 2 institutes. So, Tier 1 institutes first we will look at, then later we will have a look at the Tier 2 institutes. The subcriterion 1.2 has 4 subcriteria. The total marks coming to 30. State the process for developing, revising the program curriculum, that is 10 marks. Structure of the curriculum, that is again 10 marks. Components of the curriculum like basic sciences, engineering sciences, like this, what are the various components and what are the percentages, 5 marks for that. Strategies for education reforms, notice that a Tier 1 institute has considerable amount of freedom in terms of both curriculum design as well as its implementation as well as reforms in the curriculum processes. So, strategies for education reforms again 5 marks. So, total coming to 30, this all for Tier 1. Describe the process that periodically documents and demonstrates how the program curriculum has evolved over a period of time, how the program curriculum has evolved, how the meetings were conducted and how the brainstorming and discussions took place and what were the guidelines by which the syllabus got revised. So, what are the changes in the components of the syllabus in general. Periodically we must have an update to the program curriculum and we must record how that evolution has taken place. So, this process must take into account knowledge and attitude profiles of the Washington Accord. These have been discussed in an earlier session. What are these knowledge and attitude profiles, what is the Washington Accord, these have already been discussed, and the program curriculum evolution must take into account these WKs. Then program outcomes defined by the NBA, that also needs to be taken into account. We have discussed this also in an earlier unit, and program specific outcomes defined by the department. So, WKS, POs, PSOs, all these must be taken into account while the curriculum is being revised. The process must involve both internal and external stakeholders, including obviously industry, one of the most important stakeholders in framing the curriculum. The process must include periodic review through conferences, curriculum development workshops, and changing technological scenarios, changing role that is expected from the graduates of this program, identifying the job roles. There are so many aspects that need to be taken into account. So, periodically there must be some kind of conferences or curriculum development workshops, and based on that the curriculum must be revised or updated, and records of all this must be available. So, the exhibits or context to be observed, documentary evidence demonstrating the process by which the program curriculum evolves and undergoes periodic review, taking into consideration POs, PSOs as well as WKs. Then all this usually in a tier 1 institute is under the supervision of a board of studies. There are guidelines on how board of studies should be constituted. There are UGC guidelines available, as well as the university also may have its own suggestions regarding how the board of studies should be constituted. So, what is the composition of the board of studies and the periodicity of its meeting, how often does it meet, then participation of the industry in the deliberations of the board of studies, minutes of the meeting, what are the conclusions arrived at, all this must be available. Then feedback and review mechanism, how does one collect the feedback regarding the curriculum from the important stakeholders, industry experts, placement cells, the employers, the students, what is the mechanism for getting the feedback regarding the curriculum, and what is the mechanism for reviewing and arriving at appropriate decisions based on the feedback. Correlations to WKS, POs and PSOs, as I mentioned, Washington Accords WKS must be taken into account, POs of NBA must be taken into account, PSOs of the department must be taken into account. So, all these things, how the process is taken into consideration, that must be recorded, and process document and implementation records must be available. Then we have the sub-criterion curriculum structure. Provide details of courses in terms of teaching and learning scheme and number of credits in the program curriculum. We are now discussing the sub-criteria as it applies to tier 1 institute. However, the intent and all the details presented here apply to tier 2 institutes also, except that this sub-criteria is numbered as 1.2.1 in the case of tier 2 institutes. So, the marks allocated are 5, while the number is 10 for tier 1 institute. Notice that there is a little bit of overlap and similarity between both tier 1 and tier 2 institutes. We are just indicating as per tier 1, this is how it goes. So, the number of credits and what is the teaching learning scheme, all these details must be provided for the courses. Allocation of marks 10, and the expectation, evaluation guidelines are based on the expectation that the curriculum has courses required for the degree program, and distribution of learning hours is appropriately assigned in terms of attaining POs and PSOs, of course also taking into account WKs. So, how well the curriculum is structured and how are the courses distributed and how much credit load a course is carrying, these are all subjectively evaluated by the visiting team. So, the exhibits or context to be observed or assessed would be documentary evidence of the courses, including teaching methods and the number of credits within the program curriculum. So, details of various courses are to be presented in terms of teaching and learning scheme. This is the format in which this information has to be presented. Details of the courses in terms of teaching and learning scheme. Notice that compared to the earlier version of the SER, there is substantial change in the details in which the curriculum structure is presented. Of course, you have the course code and then the course titles, but now the teaching and learning scheme is based on the new framework that has been adopted at the national level, National Credit Framework or NCF, which accounts for 30 hours of learning as equivalent to 1 credit. This 30 hours of learning includes what happens in the classroom instruction, what happens during the laboratory instruction, what happens during the teamwork or self learning that the students engage in. So, all this is combined together, and that total number of hours which the student is spending on that particular course is taken into account in determining the credit load of that particular course. So, the total number of hours of effort put in by the student divided by 30 gives the number of credits of that course. Earlier we used to have LTP scheme, that is lectures, lecture hours, tutorial hours, practical hours. Some institutes also had a self study hours, but the NBA SCR itself talked of only LTP, lecture hours, tutorial hours and practicals, and the academic load was, credit load was described in terms of the LTP scheme. Now, what the SCR says is that please change over to this National Credit Framework scheme, convert your LTP scheme into the scheme shown here, that is show the total number of effort hours put in by the student divided by 30 and show the credit load. Here an example is shown here. For example, for a C++ course, 42 hours in the classroom there is an engagement, then there is one tutorial sessions. So, there are 14 hours which are spent in tutorials, then there are 28 hours which are spent in laboratories, then 36 hours which are spent in self learning component. This could include teamwork also. Basically, we show it as self learning, but that could be along with group members. So, it is all clubbed together in one heading as self learning heading. So, there are 36 hours. So, if you add up all these things, it comes to 120 hours. So, divided by 30, that becomes 4. So, this particular subject with the course code of 101 titled C++ has 4 credits. Similarly, there is another course, chemistry laboratory, and if you add up all these, it comes to 60 hours. So, it is equivalent to 2 credits. This is the format in which the details are to be provided. Okay. This is the new feature of SCR. So, this is what it describes. CL is classroom instruction, LI is laboratory instruction, TW and SL, they are self learning as well as teamwork. That includes assignments, seminars, micro projects, industrial visits, any other student activities. Self learning could include MOOCs, spoken tutorials, online educational resources, etc. Of course, in a curriculum structure, all these if they are included, they come into the picture. So, provide curriculum component details for all the relevant years. Now, we are discussing the next sub criterion, which talks of the components of the curriculum. Once again, we are discussing this sub criterion as it applies to Tier 1 institute. However, the intent and all the details presented here apply to Tier 2 institutes also, except that this sub criterion is numbered as 1.2.2 in the case of Tier 2 institutes. So, while you are going at the numbering of the criteria, sub criteria and all, please refer the latest version of the SCR to get to the correct numbers. But the intent, the purpose for which this is created, the kind of information that is to be provided, it is all same. So, that applies throughout. So, provide the curriculum component details of all relevant years in a particular format. We look at that. Then there are 5 marks which are allocated, and the visiting team verifies the curricular components for the attainment of POs and PSOs. How they are related to the POs and PSOs, and in terms of the attainment of POs and PSOs, the curricular components contribution is significant or marginal or not. This will be evaluated by the visiting team. It is a subjective evaluation. The documentary evidence of curriculum components must be available, and then these details are to be submitted in the specified format. So, this is the format that is required. Earlier SCR also had a similar kind of information. The curriculum components are broadly classified into basic sciences, basic engineering, humanities and social sciences, program core, program electives, open electives, projects, internships, seminars, any others, please specify. Any others could be ability enhancement courses, skill enhancement courses, value add processes, any of these kind of things can be included. Like many institutes do provide additional courses for skill enhancement with respect to modern tools or with respect to some other important skills that the students are supposed to acquire. They add other courses which are primarily labeled as skill enhancement courses. Like this, there can be courses. So, all this categorization is provided, and for each of the type of curriculum component, what is the percentage of the total number of credits of the program. If the total number of credits is 160, how many credits does program electives constitute, what percentage? So, show the curriculum components percentage in terms of the content. Then total number of contact hours, this already we have seen, total number of credits. So, you provide these details, and this gives the idea of the curriculum components. This will be evaluated by the visiting team with respect to its ability to allow the students to attain the POs and PSOs. Then another extremely important sub criterion, only 5 marks are there, but this sub criterion is fairly elaborate and very important in terms of creating a sense of the ambience of the department. It indicates what is the extent to which the department is aware of the current developments in the higher education scenario, and though there are only 5 marks, it is very important to create the right impression about the department's intents. Strategies for education reforms. There are only 5 marks as I mentioned, but curriculum design in terms of various educational reforms such as multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary approaches, multi-point entry exit schemes. Notice that these are all from the NEP, okay, NEP 2020. So, it talks of multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary approaches, multiple entry exit options in the curriculum, academic bank of credits, so that the students can keep adding credits to their bank of credits wherever they do the courses or internships. So, they can get accumulated account of their credits, academic bank of credits, skill based courses, recognition of prior learning. There are so many initiatives that the department can take for implementing these educational reforms. So, the visiting team can look at and assess these reforms. Evidence of the action plan for NEP 2020, state education policy, if it has its own education policy, in terms of that policy, what are the initiatives of the department. So, these things include the implementation plans, specific implementation records, impact studies, resources allocated, all these things will come into the picture. Then map the activities to curriculum design with the multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary programs, the establishment of an academic bank of credit system, what we discussed above, an implementation showing that it has been established, okay, and APAAR, etc. Though only 5 marks are allocated to the sub-criterion, it has many important aspects. It takes into account the significant changes that have been taking place in the education scenario in India. In particular, the NEP 2020 has made substantial suggestions regarding the higher education and what is the extent to which the department has responded to those suggestions. So, evidence of action plan for NEP 2020, state education policy, etc., including their implementations. Okay. So, this is examined by them. Then we also have to provide details of the establishment of an academic bank of credits, then APAAR, which stands for Automated Permanent Academic Account Registry, APAAR, which is a specialized identification system designed for all students in India. This initiative is part of the One Nation, One Student ID program launched by the government, aligning with the new national education policy. So, NEP 2020. So, this APAAR is a way to keep track of a particular student, because it gives all the information regarding the student, the credits earned, the specific programs for which he is registered, the specific additional programs through which the student has gone through. All this information is available, One Nation, One Student ID concept, and this right now is mostly in government institutes, but in principle the idea is that the educational institutions, higher education institutions should subscribe to this scheme. Now, the sub-criterion 1.2 for Tier 2 institutes. Notice that as we mentioned, the spirit is same between Tier 1 and Tier 2 institutes. However, because of the way the Tier 2 institutes are administered, there are certain differences and certain restrictions on the freedom provided, and that brings in certain changes. Okay. So, this also has 4 sub-criteria. Program curricular structure, that is only 5 marks. Components of the program curriculum, again 5 marks. Now, the Tier 2 institute is implementing the curriculum which is provided by the university. It is not responsible for designing its own curriculum. So, for Tier 2 institute, the role is that it must have a process to identify the extent of compliance of the university curriculum for attaining the POs and PSOs. So, if the university specified curriculum is not able to meet well the PO and PSO requirements, then we call them as curricular gaps. What does the department do? First, it has to identify the curricular gaps, then what does it do to bridge those gaps? This also becomes important. So, 1.2.3, the sub-criterion is process used to identify the extent of compliance of university curriculum for attaining the POs and PSOs. Of course, we need to mention the identified curricular gaps, if any, that is 10 marks. Then the department has to do something to bridge those gaps. So, state the delivery details of the content beyond the syllabus for the attainment of POs and PSOs. So, that is again 10 marks. course, there are constraints with respect to time and resources, but once the department identifies that there are curricular gaps, it must ensure that students are provided additional training and they are given additional inputs as required, so that the attainment of POs and PSOs improves. So, there are 10 marks given for that. So, the total is 30. And if the university curriculum is such that all the POs are being demonstrably met, then 1.24, 2.4 does not apply, because there are no curricular gaps as such, though it is very rare. In principle, it is possible that the university curriculum is extremely progressive and it is able to satisfy the requirements of all POs. Then 1.2.4 does not come into the picture, and 1.2.3 will be evaluated for 20 marks. So, provide details of the courses in terms of teaching learning scheme and number of credits in the program curriculum. Allocation of marks is 5, and as mentioned earlier, evaluation guidelines, exhibits, context to observed, assessed, the format of the table, that is to have the details of the courses in terms of teaching and learning scheme, the concept of credit, they are all same as those for Tier 1 institute. We have discussed all these things with respect to Tier 1 institute. All those details hold good here also. That is, you have to follow the national credit framework. If you are following the lecture, tutorial, practical scheme, LTP scheme, convert that to the national credit framework scheme. Total number of hours of effort put in by the student divided by 30 to arrive at the credits. All this is same. Then 1.2.2, provide details of the curriculum components approved by the university in the last year of graduation. That batch you take it as a sample program curriculum and provide that. 5 marks are allocated. Once again, what all we discussed with respect to the Tier 1 institute, that is the evaluation guidelines, exhibits, context to observed, assessed, are all the same. What we discussed with Tier 1 institute holds good here also, except that the table that is to have the details of the curriculum components is numbered differently and has some minor differences. Okay. So, this is the table. Similar table was used for Tier 1 institutes also, except that for example, the internship seminars and these things, slight modifications are there, but otherwise we have the same basic sciences, basic engineering, humanities and social sciences, then program core, then you can also have major minor concept, the university approves it, then you can have those concepts, then program electives, open electives, multidisciplinary, all this information. Then once again, in terms of percentages, how much this component occupies in terms of the total credits of the program. If total credits are 160, then how many credits are allocated to project, what percentage. So, you indicate that, then total number of contact hours as well as total number of credits. So, it is quite similar to what we discussed with respect to Tier 1 institute. Then 1.2.3, state the process used to identify the extent of compliance of the university curriculum for attaining POs and PSOs. Because the institute cannot devise its own curriculum, it has to analyze the university given curriculum and see how good it is in terms of enabling the students to attain the POs and PSOs. So, you must have a process for identifying these capabilities of the university curriculum. 10 marks are allocated, and then the process used to identify the extent of compliance, we need to have a written process and we must show that the process is implemented. Then if the process has identified any gaps, list those curricular gaps. So, documentary evidence to indicate the process, and then effective participation of internal external department stakeholders with effective process implementation. So, the process must include mapping the outcomes of the university curriculum's courses to the POs and PSOs and determining the extent to which the POs and PSOs are being addressed, and if there are substantial weaknesses in terms of addressing certain POs or PSOs, then identify them and then list them as curricular gaps. So, the process used to identify the extent of compliance of the university curriculum in attaining POs and PSOs. So, you can use the program articulation matrix, which comes later in subcriterion 1.5, which essentially shows the correlation between the courses in the curriculum and POs and PSOs. In one glance, one single table shows a snapshot of the correlations between the courses in the program, the core courses, and POs and PSOs. So, by looking at those correlations, we can see which POs are being addressed very weakly. If a column corresponding to a particular PO is very sparse, that means there are not many courses which are contributing towards that PO, that means that there is a curriculum gap. And if a particular column is very dense, that means there are quite a good number of courses addressing that particular PO, which means that that PO is well met by the university curriculum. So, this is one way. So, this program articulation matrix, which we will discuss later units, depicts the correlation between the courses and the program outcomes and program specific outcomes. So, column averages indicate the extent to which the curriculum is compliant to the POs and PSOs. So, as I just now mentioned, a sparse column shows that the corresponding PO, PSO is not adequately addressed by the curriculum. So, process document and implementation records must be available. Identified curricular gaps, if any, must be listed along with the justifications for the appropriateness of the identified gaps. Then process documents, implementation records must be available. Then finally, once we identify there are curricular gaps, what does the department do? What are the delivery details of the content beyond the syllabus for the attainment of POs and PSOs? Marks allocated 20. So, the steps taken to identify the gaps we have discussed. Now, how do we address those gaps? So, how to bridge those gaps? So, that has to be discussed. And has the department taken any steps to inform the university about the identified gaps, so that the university could revise its curriculum in its next update? That is also important. So, steps taken to get identified gaps included in the curriculum. So, perhaps a letter to the chairman of the board of studies at the university level, there are 2 marks for that. Delivery details of content beyond syllabus, 5 marks. Then mapping this content which beyond syllabus which you are providing, that must be mapped to the POs and PSOs, and they must be the ones which are weakly addressed. There is no point in providing additional courses which are addressing the PO which is already well addressed by the university curriculum. The additional content that you are providing must address the POs which are weakly addressed by the university curriculum. So, you must show that mapping, and you must show that you are addressing such weakly addressed POs, so that the curriculum gaps are bridged. So, document evidence of the steps taken at regular intervals, as I mentioned, probably a letter to the affiliating university, and then suggesting what kind of improvements can take place in the curriculum. Then of course, any follow up that you can do with the university, you must have records of all these things and have evidence of all such communication happening, that is, wrote the letter through proper authorities, maybe the principal, and have a copy of that available with you to show that you have communicated with the university. And if you have written any follow up letters, have copies of all this. Important, whatever we do, we must have record of that activity. So, the mapping between content beyond syllabus and POs, PSOs addressed by their content must be justifiable. Then it is also a good practice to analyze the impact of the additional content delivered. We have devised some additional content to bridge the gap. To what extent this content has served that purpose? Maybe some kind of a feedback from the participants can be taken, some kind of exit test can be done, but it is essential to know that the additional content that the department is providing to the students has been really effective in addressing the PO which is not adequately addressed by the university curriculum. That is, this additional content is helping the students get better attainments in those POs. So, the effectiveness must be measured. So, to some extent it is good practice to always do an impact analysis of the additional content delivered. Then provide details of the content beyond syllabus, including value added courses, workshops, seminars, hands-on experience, etc. This is the format. PO, PSO listed in the identified gaps. So, this is what we mentioned. Your additional course must be oriented towards the PO, PSO which is listed in identified gap. If a PO is already well addressed by the university, there is no point in repeating the additional courses addressing the same PO. So, what is the activity organized by the department, name of the event, date of the event, resource person or organization, then how it is relevant to the POs, PSOs. Give it for 3 consecutive years, CAY -1, -2, -3, and that concludes our discussion of the sub criterion 1.2 of criterion 1. Still we are with criterion 1 of ACR. It is fairly elaborate criterion with several features, the outcome based curriculum. So, in the next unit the objective will be to look at the SAR requirements of criterion 1, still OBC, sub criteria 1.3, 1.4 and 1.5. These are the sub criteria that we look at in the next unit. Okay. Thank you. We will meet again in the next unit. Thank you.